So as you're picking through your pieces of clay that you gathered in the field, you'll find rocks and pieces of debris, roots, plants, and even pieces of wood. So pick the pieces up that you can and kind of gather them in your hand and can snap them. See if they're actually, soil or if this is junk. The more junk you can get out of your clay sample now, the better off you will be later on. For steps 3 and 4, you're going to put your sample into a mason jar or an old spaghetti jar. That's totally fine. It just needs to have a tight-fitting lid, and clear glass is best. You can see in the video I am taking a piece of paper to act like a funnel. And I did this inside my home. I highly recommend you doing this outside the house. Somewhere like on a back porch would be totally fine because of that clay dust that you see coming into the the jar. You don't want that to come out into your house. And then I'm adding water, and you want to put water all the way up is fine. And then all you need is one little drop of dish soap. And then you're going to put the lid back on and you're going to shake like crazy. So shake that up really, really well. And you'll notice I'm shaking it like crazy. You're going to put it down, let it sit for 5 minutes, and then shake it like crazy again before going on to step 5. So now that it's been sitting for about 1 to 2 minutes, you can see the heavy particles kind of settle to the bottom. There's that darker layer at the bottom there. That's the rocks, the sand, and it settled down to the bottom. So now we can pour the top contents off, which includes suspended articles of clay. You're going to take a new jar, open up the old one, and pour that suspended particles, just the top water, off. And you can see I'm trying not to go too fast, but I also don't want to go too slow. And you can see that sludginess at the bottom of the first mason jar. That's all good stuff still. There's a lot of clay particles still in there. So what you can do is add water again into the first mason jar. So fill that up with water again, shake it like crazy, and go through that process again. You might need multiple mason jars or multiple pasta jars to gather all that suspended material, which is the clayey water. And here you can see I did my process 3 times. So here I got a second and third mason jar. And this one you can really see the silty layer kind of forming on the bottom. Those are all the rocks and stuff. And the suspended layers there. So I'm going to pour that out. Remember, this is where our clay is. We're not going to produce a ton of clay, but we don't need a lot of clay for what we're going to be using this for. And again, there's plenty of kind of slippish material in the jar still. You can see those really fine particles. So I'm going to go get more water, and I'm going to pour water into the original mason jar one last time, shake it up like crazy, and then pour that excess suspended material into the first and second mason jars. And you can see in this last one, you can kind of see the heavier materials again at the bottom. And remember, there's only 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes between each pour of water. So I'm going to take those really suspended particles out. I'm just going to fill up the other 2 mason jars so I can get as much material out as I can. Now, I could do this process a 4th time, even a 5th time, because when you look inside the jar, you can still see that slaky material. The really fine slaky material is clay. The larger chunks, that's all junk. So now I'm going to let these jars sit for 30 minutes to an hour, and that's going to allow the silt layer to Okay guys, so an hour has gone by and we have my jars over there. No, over on this side. So we have the jars, and then you can see that little bit of silt that's left over at the bottom. But it's only been an hour, so, or actually 30 minutes. So the clay layer is pretty thick, pretty noticeable. I'm going to use a strainer this time because I have some floating things at the top of my container, and it's mainly just pieces of wood and debris from when I dug it out of the hill. So I'm going to pour that out, catching all that debris. And this is the amount of clay that we're really going to be having. So I have about 2 containers worth of clay-ish material that I need to then dry out. So this is my first container, and then you can see all that junkiness that's going to go in the trash. So I have one more clean jar. And make sure that this step you are putting it into a pretty secured jar, because we're going to be letting them sit for 24 hours. You don't want anybody to accidentally pour them out. Maybe put a sticky note on each one so your roommates or your parents, whoever you live with, doesn't think this is junk and just, pour it down the drain. You've done all this work already. You don't want to, ooh, that's a lot of junk. You don't want to have all the work that you've done go down the drain. So there you go. Okay guys, so now that you have left your jar to sit for at least 24 hours, maybe a little bit longer than that, but you can see my jar is still a little murky, but the top is fairly clear. I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to be careful just to pour off that top water, and you can see as it's pouring, it looks fairly clear. Careful not to disturb it or shake it at all, because then the clay is going to get up into that water. So I'm going to pour this out, and then I just have a small amount of clay. I mean, my sample didn't have a lot of materials, so I don't have as much clay as I really wanted, but that's okay. Now you're going to add clay that I provide for you next. Okay, so this is where it gets real exciting. So I provided for you in your ceramics to go kit a small sample of fire clay that is locally sourced. It's actually from Ione. If you know anybody that lives up there, there's a big clay deposit up there. So you're going to spoon that in. Do this outside. I'm doing this in my home studio, but my home studio is connected to my garage. It doesn't have recycled air like you might have in your house. So do this outside. You do not want clay dust to get up into the air and then be recycled by your air conditioning unit. I also recommend wearing like a NEOSH 95 mask, which we all suddenly have, right, from COVID. So wear your mask as you're doing this so you don't inadvertently inhale some. Put your lid back on your container and shake, shake, shake. You're combining your clay that you sourced and then this locally sourced clay. It will probably be like a tannish color once it's done, and then set that aside. Now I had 2 jars, and I'm not going to make you watch me do this again, but essentially, yeah, unscrew the lid, you pour off the top water, and then you add that clay from Ione into the container. Okay, so now things are getting really exciting because we're actually in the process of making the clay now. So we have a pillowcase. Any pillowcase will do. If you have like a really thin old pillowcase, you might want to double it up. That might work. Or if you have like an old sheet, you can just make a little pocket for it. You're not producing a ton of clay here, so we don't need something large, but we do need something that's going to allow moisture to kind of flow out and the clay to stay in. So open your container and use a spatula and really get that goopy clay in. You can see my stuff is fairly thick because I had to add all that fire clay, which you will as well, and that fire clay is going to absorb some of the extra moisture. So one of the reasons why we're using this fire clay is to make sure that your pieces don't melt in the kiln. Fire clay is very refractory, meaning it withstands heat. And terracotta clays that are usually in our soils, they tend to melt at a fairly low temperature. So add a little bit of water to your jar because we want to get all that clay goodness out. Shake it up, and if you can look at the top of the jar on the far left of the screen, you can see there's quite a bit of clay caked onto the lid of the jar, so make sure you get all that good stuff in there. Pour that into the bucket as well. And again, that's only like this much water. It's not very much at all. You don't want to fill it up and then you end up undoing all the work that you've done. So don't use too much water. So I did that with the 2 jars are already in the container, and I'm cleaning out both jars with a little bit of water and putting it into the bucket. So the fire clay that I gave you guys, it's also to help dry out the clay that you're processing. Usually this type takes quite a lot of time to process. So we're trying to speed this up by adding some dry material to our wet material. So I'm lifting up my pillowcase. I'm just kind of squeegeeing, pushing any of the clay that's on the walls of the pillowcase because of my bad aim into that bottom section. And really that's all the clay that we're producing with this. I'm just shaking it a little bit, trying to get it in. Yeah. And then I'm just going to twist and kind of hang it over the edge of the bucket. And then put this outside. You know, if you're working in your home, you don't want this to get kicked and then all that dirty water to get all over your floor. Put this outside, but you want to monitor it. If you forget about your clay, your little clay baby here, and you leave it outside in this awful heat and it dries out to be bone dry, you will have to add water and start the process all over again. So you don't want that to happen. So set it aside and then check it every single day until it's a nice moist consistency where you can touch it and it might stick to your finger a little bit, but it kind of gives, you can kind of feel it has a little bit of a body to itself. That is what you're going to take a photograph of you holding that and then submit it to the assignment. All right, guys, good.